the CX leaders, customer service, management folks who make the buying decisions, they're not asking about, I need a new contact center. They're asking, I need AI. One of the best attributes of being a good analyst is curiosity.
Mm.
You've got to have a sense of understanding what's going on and what it all means.
As I'm hearing you talk there, it almost seems as though, like, if you imagine what the universe was like during the kind of like the Big Bang and the early formation of the universe, where you've got everything's just smashing into each other and colliding into each other.
We're industry based. And because we talk to everybody and we're not employed by the vendors, our value is perceived as we're neutral, right? In my view, the pandemic is the best thing that could ever have happened for UCaaS because it was the technology, it was the right tech at the right time.
And then you throw AI into the mix, and that's another thing that's like, it's like dropping a grenade into it all.
So if you can basically control the conversation or own the conversation, you'll own the customer.
My message is just get on with it, solve the problem in front of you, just start using these tools, get it done, and then you can make the space for the bigger, more transformative stuff.
Gee, I think we should take this on the road.
The following is a conversation with Jon Arnold. Jon is a legend in the analyst community. He's been an independent analyst for quite a number of years now. And what this guy doesn't know about the UCaaS, CCaaS, and CPaaS space is not worth knowing. Obviously, AI becoming such a thing as it is now has infiltrated what Jon calls that three-legged stool of UCaaS, CCaaS, and CPaaS, and is adding to the fire, the fuel of the fire, some real potential disruption. So this is a great conversation about the tech landscape as it relates to business communications technologies, the impact that AI is having, and where it all might go, the kind of disruption that we might see, where might that come from? And ultimately, will there be a big winner in all of this AI innovation, or will it be spread across many different companies? This is a great conversation for anyone interested in where the landscape is right now in terms of AI adoption in businesses and how the technology companies that sit in and around businesses are performing and doing as far as their AI capabilities are concerned. You've got AI coming from all angles now. Contact center providers are offering AI capabilities, CRM providers are offering AI capabilities, and all of that type of technology all seems to be converging. Plus, you've got the new entrants into the market, like the bespoke kind of like purpose-built AI providers. And so there's a lot of carnage going on in that market, and Jon joins me to make a little bit of sense of it. So without further ado, here's Jon Arnold on VUX World. Build and deploy sophisticated chat, voice, and multimodal applications for any purpose with NLX. NLX works seamlessly with any LLM and existing tech stack, freeing you to create, not configure. Trusted by individual builders and leading teams at Comcast, Saks Fifth Avenue, Toyota, and United Airlines, NLX helps you turn AI concepts into working conversational experiences. If you are interested in how NLX can power your AI transformation, visit nlx.ai. That is nlx.ai. Shout out to NLX for sponsoring this episode of VUX World.
We're typically called either tech analysts or industry analysts, and that hat is really about people like me. We're kind of analytical types. We like to write, we like numbers, we have a lot of curiosity, and we follow the trends in the market. So the thing that distinguishes an analyst from, and we'll get to this in a moment, Kane, that distinguishes us from journalists or freelancers is that we are kind of invested in a particular space, and we make it our business to build relationships with the leading vendors, the leading channel partners, the whole ecosystem. So we kind of know things at an industry level because we talk to, most of the companies who are players. And from that, we get this kind of collective perspective that is, first of all, it's industry based. So you won't see analysts touting themselves generally as a Cisco expert. There are some who position themselves just as one vendor, but for the most part, we're industry based. And because we talk to everybody and we're not employed by the vendors, our value is perceived as we're neutral, right? We're objective, right? Otherwise, if we're just a mouthpiece for one vendor, we won't have any credibility. But our credibility comes from the big picture, right? We see and we talk to the broad spectrum of the players, so we get a collective impression of what's going on, and most people don't get a chance to do that, right? So a good way to distinguish, because we're often the way people come across analysts, it's usually from something that we've written, right? Either an article or report, an opinion piece somewhere, right? Where we're quoted. People get to see that. The thing you have to understand is distinguishing between what analysts do in that vein and what journalists do. So for the tech pubs, right, like UC Today, No Jitter, right, Channel Futures, the pubs that cover the industry, analysts and journalists do a lot of similar things, but we are different. We go a little deeper because journalists tend to be like they're not subject matter experts. They cover a lot of ground, so they know a lot of many things, but not a lot specifically in depth. So the way I characterize it, Kane, is I say journalists describe, analysts explain.
Right.
Right. So we can kind of tell the whys, not just the whats, but the whys and the hows, what people want to know. So our audience is typically the buyers of the technologies, right? The decision makers, the IT guys, right? The developers, the people who are hands-on with the technology, generally inside an enterprise or a business, who are looking at the landscape and saying, hey, you know what, we're kind of married to teams here, but we want to look at our alternatives. Maybe we're not that happy with it and we want to see other things. So they'll look for analysts, because it's a little bit like these sometimes it could be like a little bit like a consumer's report, where you say, okay, let me get an objective opinion on the market. So that's where we come in and we kind of talk about these things. But the vendors are looking for us to be, objective and fair, so we can say the good and the bad, right? So there's value to that. We're not in the business of bashing uh, vendors or doing a lot of bake-offs and saying this vendor is really great at this vendor sucks. There are people who do that, but generally the analysts don't. It's also important to note, Kane, that there's two branches of the analyst tree in our space. Most analysts work for an analyst firm, right? So the Gartners, Forresters, IDCs of the world. For example, I used to work for Frost and Sullivan, so I come out of that space, so I have the discipline of what an analyst needs to do. And that's the vast majority of the analyst landscape. But there's this other kind of more like a twig than a branch of what we call indies, independent analysts, who are basically, we're typically one-man operations or one-woman operations. So there's a handful of us in our little tribe, maybe 10, 15 of us who have been at this a long time. And we're entrepreneurial types. We've established our own brands and identities, and we each have our own particular expertise or kind of circle of vendors that we're really close to. So that's kind of the way the analyst world works. But there's also a little middle ground too, of more like boutique analyst firms that aren't Gartner size, but are more small. Maybe they might have a half a dozen or a dozen analysts in house. So there's quite a few of those, like Opus, Metrigy. There's quite a few, Everest Group, that are smaller boutique kind of firms, and they tend to have a specific focus. They might be just all about developers or all about contact center infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a lot of value in the marketplace too.
Interesting.
So yeah, I could go on and on and on, but the last thing I'll say about the analyst world, Kane, is nobody goes to school to be an analyst. It is not a certified line of work.
Yeah.
Which is very different from the financial analysts, right, who cover obviously the public companies for the most part, right, where they have very specific things that they follow, and they have to have financial competence. So they are the CFAs, certified financial analysts. They do have to have accreditation to comment on the numbers, on the earnings and the financial performance of companies. But that's a different type of analyst than what
Mm.
we are, right?
So
So tech analysts, we come from all walks of life, and we do.
right. So tech analyst. So your kind of predominant role, as you see it, then, is to gather information, intelligence, market insights from vendors within a particular domain, analyze what's going on, what the trends are, what's important for buyers to consider when they're looking to buy certain technologies and stuff like that. And you do that through, if I'm reading between the lines, writing about it, publishing, etc.
Yes, yes. So the short answer to that is we call it thought leadership,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's an easy handle for people to understand about what what it looks like. What we do, we all have our own kind of way of doing things. But aside from the vendors too, Kane, it's important to note that we also talk to customers, end users, the channels. In certain cases, the regulatory agencies and the like you have the EU Digital Act, right? The AI Act in the EU. There's stuff like that sometimes we have to keep on top of to get the fuller picture,
Mm.
right? But that's kind of our place, yeah. And so what that looks like is typically, what we publish in articles and maybe shorter write-ups that are publicly accessible would be considered thought leadership. It's usually some form of an analysis that we do. And the big difference between what we do and the analyst firms, right? Their calling card is primarily they write reports about the industry,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where they are typically producing market shares, growth forecasts, right? Things that are metrics based. And sometimes they'll do end user surveys. And that's their business model. Like the big analyst firms, the way the market engages with them is they pay very expensive subscription fees to access these reports, which are generally not publicly shared. Independent analysts like myself, we don't publish those reports. That's not our business model. So we tend to work directly with the vendors or the buyers, but it's usually the vendors for more depth of analysis. So the things that you will read on like LinkedIn or published articles, that's for the general public to see. But also we produce things that are, proprietary for the vendors where it's a little more, analytical, there's more depth to that, and there's value to that for them. So we help them. A good way to look at it too, Kane, is we also help educate the market, right?
Mm.
Because we have an independent, objective analysis that helps educate the market about not just the vendors but the trends, right? So when you spoke at Cognigy, for example, you've got a really good handle on some of these speech tech trends, and I've been following that space a long time as well, and to educate the buyer because they don't want to make the wrong bet on the technology,
Mm.
right? They may think that, for example, they may think that telephony is dead. I'm going to move on and we're just going to do messaging from this point on, when we're here to tell them no, voice is alive and well. It's just morphing into other things, and don't abandon telephony because it still has value. So we're there to kind of tell them a little bit about what those trends really mean for them, and there's value to that because until you walk in the shoes of a IT guy or a CX leader, you find out very quickly, Kane, that they live in a very kind of small world. They
Mm.
don't see what we see. They just see what goes on in their organization, so they're not getting the big picture. So that's what we bring to help them, make better, more informed buying decisions and planning and strategy for how they use these technologies.
Mm. I suppose then I can understand how people might look at Vux and think that we are an analyst firm or that I'm an analyst, because I suppose there's a bit of that we do, and I think that's just a natural byproduct of being so interested in this space, and it hasn't been something that like we've kind of like set out to do. It's just been that like, yeah, we'll be at the Cognigy event and the Boost event, and because we're interested in this technology, and I think that all we're trying to do is just, I suppose, very similar to you, is just absorb as much as we can, take it all in, understand what's working and what's not working, and figure it all out together, basically.
Well, yeah. And I said earlier, one of the best attributes of being a good analyst is curiosity.
Mm,
You've got to have a sense of like what's understanding what's going on and what it all means. And you're, for example, you're Vux, you're doing a podcast, right? You have an ongoing content stream of these types of interviews. And many analysts, myself included, I've been doing my own podcast for 8 years now, and it's just another channel to share our thought leadership and insights from other people. So you have guests on the podcast like we're doing here. That there's a lot of value to that. And you are, in a sense, as I said before, there's no qualifications to be an analyst. So most independents, for example, come out of working for an analyst firm, but not all of them do. Some of them just know the space well enough that they can kind of call themselves analysts and become self-styled analysts. And after a while, people don't really make that distinction anymore. If you're good, you're good. If you know what you're talking about, I don't care whether I call you an analyst or a guru or whatever.
mm.
If you know the market, you know the market. And that raises a very important kind of new wrinkle in all of this, Kane, and I'm sure you're coming across this a lot too, is the influencer concept.
Yeah.
Right? We are all influencers, whether you're writing or speaking or doing podcasts, video interviews, whatever. It's all forms of thought leadership that have a lot of value in the marketplace. And the term influencer has become pretty important in the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 years, where a lot of people can get this influencer moniker and get a lot of attention, but they're not necessarily deep in the topic, right? Influencers by nature, I think, are very good at building a following, tapping into that following, but they're not really the creators of the thought leadership, right? They're amplifying often other people's stuff. So I'm very big on cautioning vendors and anyone who will listen to me about knowing the distinction. And the way I categorize it is that all analysts are influencers. I think by nature we have to be. Otherwise, if no one listens to us, we don't have any value. But not all influencers are analysts.
Yeah, that makes
right?
sense.
And so just say you're an influencer doesn't mean you're an expert in the industry. And you got to be careful. You have to make that distinction.
Yeah, I mean, you could be an influencer just based on charisma and having an association to a topic area, but not really having the depth of understanding, I suppose.
Yeah, like for what it's happening within organizations now, with the vendors in particular, is digital marketing has become a big thing now. And what's important for the brands to get their message out and to really stand out, because all these spaces are so crowded now, is they have to be able to get reach.
Yeah.
And that's what influencers bring. I don't have a million person reach. No analyst does. But influencers do that because social media is their business, right? So they can bring a big reach, and vendors value that. And there is value to that. But you got to match the reach with the content.
Yeah.
And that's why if you can strike a balance with both, you're golden. That's really the best combination, right?
Yeah. So would I be right in thinking then that your experience and predominant area of activity is in the kind of like business communications space, customer experience, UCaaS, CCaaS, kind of all of that like critical business infrastructure that is used both internally for people to kind of like work together and communicate with each other, and also customer facing when customers need to interact with businesses. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, exactly. We talk about like the three-legged stool of cloud communications, which is CCaaS, CPaaS, and UCaaS, right? Those are the three big platforms that businesses use. So we're certainly B2B for starters, right? But increasingly, a lot of stuff is bleeding into the B2C world now, because the worlds of certainly in the CX space, the worlds of customer service and marketing and sales are starting to intersect a lot more, because it's one thing to talk to customers when they have issues. That's what the contact center does. But brands also have to engage with customers on a regular basis, and of course acquire new customers, and that's the world of sales and marketing. But as we know, Kane, they both use the same tools and technologies,
Mm.
but they kind of are siloed. And I think organizations are starting to realize they have to have a more holistic strategy and way of doing things, because the customer doesn't see the brand that way. They just see one company. They don't think about contact centers over here and marketing promotions are over here, right? They don't think like that. So you have to kind of bring everything under kind of one umbrella and do it in a very integrated way. And most brands are not very good at doing that. And that's where they need help for sure. And they have to kind of rethink what it means. This is all because these technologies, as we know, Kane, are so disruptive and moving so fast. It's creating these new bridges that we just have to have, because we can't keep doing things in a siloed way. It's just not going to be effective.
Yeah, I think that's the age-old story of of many kind of legacy businesses, isn't it? Which is just a big siloed kind of operation. But I see where you're coming from there in terms of the CCaaS, CPaaS, and UCaaS side of things. And I think you've also probably seen some, or whether consolidation is the word, I don't know. But in those spaces where you have companies like, Zoom, which is UCaaS, but also CCaaS now, and it's like companies like Genesis. I don't know if Genesis has got CPaaS, but Vonage, for example, CPaaS, but there's a contact center, so there's CCaaS in there. Twilio, probably a good example of that. Have you observed that it's those three legs of the stool are becoming one? Is that what you're getting at just there?
Well, so yeah, there are certainly, there's a handful, and I'd put Cisco in that bucket too, that can do all three very well. Some of them, it's native, they have all the pieces, and some are through partnerships or long-term integrations that they can deliver all this. And the reason is actually, to me, it's very straightforward. But I mean, UCAS is kind of what started a lot of this stuff on a big scale. And the pandemic is, it's kind of the ground zero event for a lot of this stuff, because in my view, the pandemic is the best thing that could ever have happened for UCAS,
Mm.
because it was the technology, it was the right tech at the right time. We couldn't imagine if the pandemic had happened 5 years earlier. We wouldn't have had the tools like Teams or WebEx or any of these platforms to enable remote communications and virtual, and hybrid models of working, where we could be just as effective outside the office as in the office. But UCAS delivered that. So it really validated the model, and it validated the cloud for sure, because you couldn't do this with just strictly prem based stuff, right? So the UCAS market exploded. But as we know, because teams gave it away for free during the pandemic, they kind of got a lock on the market.
Mm.
And so two things have happened since then. UCAS stopped being a growth story because the market was saturated. Everybody had it. And Microsoft became so dominant, the other vendors were having a real hard time making a go of it. So with the UCAS market kind of in low growth, no growth mode, contact center was booming, because it's all about cloud adoption. You can't do these things without cloud adoption. And contact center was about 3 to 5 years behind the UCaaS space in terms of cloud adoption. But contact centers were struggling with prem stuff, as we know, but they were just kind of late to cloud. So the growth op shifted from UCaaS to CCaaS. Also, because you mentioned earlier about changing like expectations with new technologies, right?
Mm.
Um, the contact center has a lot of fundamental problems and challenges that they don't have the tools to provide the service that customers expect today, because we're all digital and mobile first and everything. So contact centers had some real pain points. So that's going to get attention from, from the budgets to invest in the technologies to address that. So all of a sudden, CCaaS became the hot space. Well, with the UCaaS vendors running out of room to grow, they've all adopted a CCaaS capability as well, either by acquisition or just organically. So, as you say, all UCaaS players are also in the CCaaS game. That's where the money is. That's where the growth is. But now that space is becoming pretty commodified too, getting really hard to tell the difference. So the kind of the man in the middle is the CPaaS world. You mentioned Twilio, right? Infobip is another great example. I was at their event last month. Cinch, and of course, yes, Vonage and Cisco have strong CPaaS capabilities. CPaaS is to me a bit like could be like the secret sauce because this whole concept of programmable communications and open APIs and tapping into big developer communities, that kind of gives any enterprise or small business kind of an innovation engine, right? To keep developing new apps and new services and new offerings to keep it interesting, especially on the mobile side, right? We're starting to see the transition from SMS to RCS now,
Hmm.
and that opens up huge opportunities for communication. And you need CPaaS capabilities to really make that hum. And that's what we're starting to see now. So these worlds, you kind of almost need to have a little bit of all three to kind of be truly competitive, right? And so that's why you would think, why are we talking about Twilio in the contact center? They had Flex, like Amazon, you could say the same thing, but it's not really a contact center platform, yet it does address certain types of customer needs very well. And so you talked about legacy earlier, Kane. We got to move away from these legacy ideas and mentalities about, yeah, contact centers siloed over here and marketing's over here and workforce communications is over here. You can't do it like that anymore. You have to have everything type being, really connected and integrated because it's all one big thing now. So, eventually we're going to stop having these distinctions between CCaaS and UCaaS, CPaaS. It'll just be, as you might say, business communications platforms that kind of work all these, because that's what the vendors are all moving towards. Because again, if you're a buyer, why do you want to fuss with like 3 or 4 vendors with multiple platforms? Wouldn't you rather have one platform and one partner for all of it? I mean, that would be the easiest because they're moving so fast. They don't have time to learn all these things. So it's challenging for both the vendors who want to push these technologies and for the buyers who need solutions like today,
It's almost like, as I'm hearing you talk there, it almost seems as though, like, if you imagine what the universe was like during the kind of like the Big Bang and the early formation of the universe, where you've got everything's just smashing into each other and colliding into each other, and there's probably lots of similarities in around, but they're all just everything's bashing around and it's all a bit random. It kind of feels a little bit like that, which is that it's chaotic and nothing's settled because you've got like
exactly.
yeah, Microsoft have got kind of like, the UCaaS thing sorted with Teams. They've also got the CRM play with Dynamics. Then they had a contact center on top of Dynamics. And then you've got Zoom, which has got UCaaS. And then perhaps that's why they ended up going into the CCaaS space, because that might have saturated on the UCaaS side. So now they've got CCaaS. And it's like all these players. And then you throw AI into the mix. And that's another thing that's like, it's like dropping a grenade into it all, because it's like now you've got a whole bunch of new players. So maybe there's a third leg of the stool, which is AI automation capabilities. And even those guys are getting into the contact center now. So Core AI's got a contact center capability. Zoom's got the contact center, but it's got Zoom virtual agents. Salesforce CRM, but it's got the virtual agents. So it's all of these things. The AI thing put in as the fourth leg all seem to be sort of like smashing together, but still nothing's quite settled.
Exactly. So for a long time, I've been saying that there's no center of gravity anymore, that you can kind of pull everything to one thing. It is this like cluster, as you say, of all these, pieces out there. And yes, it's chaotic for sure. And, what I've always said, like with cloud, it just means that anybody can do anything now, right? It used to be that, vendors that have no business being in the voice space are in the voice space now because there's money to be made there. And yeah, you're right. All these AI guys who are coming in, Like Cognigy is a great example. They're not a contact center player, but guess what? All the vendors are partnering with them pretty much. It's a little bit like Google with CCAI, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of becoming this, a bit of an arms dealer to have everyone using the same. So the big threat that I see for a lot of this, aside from this no center of gravity, is the growing dominance of basically, the hyperscalers, right? Of Amazon, obviously Microsoft and Google. Because everything's about cloud now. And cloud is a scale-based business. You can't make money doing it small. And the hyperscalers kind of own the infrastructure for cloud. And so they control the most important lever for all of this stuff. And increasingly, as you say, in the AI space, again, it's coming down to 3 or 4 players, OpenAI, right, who really can dominate the evolution of this space. All the data is going to flow their way because that's where the data centers are, and that's where the source of the oxygen for AI is data. So it's going to the aggregators who have all of this will have increasingly stronger influence on how this market shapes out. So yeah, if you're a pure play contact center vendor and you're not doing anything else, that's going to be hard. So the pure plays, for example, like Five9, Talkdesk, to some extent, even like the bigger ones like Genesis and Nice, they're going to have a hard time just being contact center. And we saw from the Nice event, they're clearly moving into a much higher plane now, getting beyond just CX stuff. They're being very strategic about where it's going. And this is like, I like to talk about disruption versus innovation. Right now, we're seeing a lot of disruption. But when the chaos kind of can settle, that same energy will become more about innovation. That's where the new business models and the ecosystems will build around that. And that's where you will see the real winners emerge. But right now it's like anybody's game. And that's why you say, good example you mentioned, like with Salesforce, they're often this disruption comes from players outside the traditional space, right? And that's why they're in a very good position to do things. Oracle could be a big disruptor if they want to be. ServiceNow, like with their partnership, not just with NICE, but with Five9 and other contact center vendors, they're all kind of touching on the edges of these spaces. And if they have the right engines to do things at scale faster than these native players can, they're going to win business. So it can come from anywhere. And we're not even talking about Amazon, right? They can do whatever they want. No one can stop what they want to do.
Yeah, I think the thing with the big hyperscalers is that they've got the resources to essentially, as you said, do what you want. So Amazon, you can build what you want on AWS. Entire businesses have been built on AWS, but they've also got contact center capabilities. They've also got AI capabilities, so they can kind of do it all themselves. Microsoft's very, very similar. It's interesting, though, when you talk about disruption versus innovation. I'd like to get your perspectives on this. Is something that I think could happen in my imagination, given that I kind of got into all of this space through the lens of AI. So I kind of come into the sort of like CX world and the CCaaS world from the AI world, not the other way around, which I think is maybe where some people might have been. And so when I look at companies like Genesis, and I look at them and they're invested in AI, I kind of look at that from the outside and I think, I'm not convinced that they're going to win the AI game, because, and this is not me picking on Genesis. I'm talking about Genesis could be any of those CCaaS providers, Avaya, all those kind of companies. And the reason why I don't think they're going to win in the AI game is because their core business is not AI. Their core business is the CCaaS or the UCaaS or whatever it might be. And so when you look at a company like, let's say, Genesis or whoever, and you compare them to like a Cognigy or a Boost or someone like that, you think, well, a Cognigy, their bread and butter and all they do is AI. And I kind of think, like, if I fast forward 5, 10, 15 years, however long it takes, you mentioned there that OpenAI could be one of the big winners, and that's because all the data flows there. Well, the question is, where's the data coming from? The data is coming from the end user. So as more businesses put AI front and center in all the messaging channels, in all the email channels, in all the contact center channels, and every single channel hits an AI first. All the data flows through the AI provider. So that means that what you can then do if you're the AI provider, if you're the Cognigy of the world, is you can say, right, well, I've got all the data coming through me. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to store that data here and make it accessible to people. Therefore, what's the value of a dedicated CRM? I'm also going to add in the plumbing to be able to escalate to live agents to handle the contact center side of things. And therefore, why do you need a separate contact center? So while you have these call center providers who are sort of like diversifying into AI and the CRM providers diversifying into AI, for me, I kind of view it from the perspective coming into this whole thing from the AI sort of world. I think, well, those AI vendors, the battle now is for the touch point with the customer. And if the AI vendors get that touch point, I think that they can vertically integrate into the whole stack, and that's going to be where the disruption comes from.
Exactly, because it's the conversations, and whether they're voice or text or video, it doesn't really matter. It's the conversations that customers are having with the brand that really not just tell the story, but that provides the data that you need. And so if you can basically control the conversation or own the conversation, you'll own the customer. And the reason why there's so much focus on the CX with the AI stuff is yes, the problems are very obvious and need to be solved. But more importantly to me is that by nature, customer service and the contact center environment is a very data-rich place.
Mm.
Because when you think about how contact centers are run, agents are tracked on all the KPIs. The whole ecosystem of a contact center is built around metrics. So it's a natural hotspot for AI because data is the lifeblood of AI. So, hey, there's a lot of data here. It's already being captured. We're just going to use it in a more intelligent way. And I think it's great. But to your point, Kane, I totally agree with you. I had a really interesting briefing with Google about their contact center play a couple of months. It was at Enterprise Connect. And the reason why I come away thinking that they're very well positioned is they explain that what you just said, they're not a contact center native player, but they're an AI native player.
Mm-hmm.
And contact center CX is just another problem set for them to apply that to. What they are seeing in the marketplace is the buyers, the CX leaders, customer service, management folks who make the buying decisions. They're not asking about, I need a new contact center. They're asking, I need AI. So what's the fear factor that's driving the buying decisions is based around, we've got to be AI centric or AI first. So they need a vendor who's AI native.
Mm-hmm.
They're less interested in a contact center native vendor who's bolted on AI because they're more comfortable saying, no, I need the best AI. That's what top management is mandating. So this is kind of how the whole buying cycle and psychology is changing now. All the contact center vendors have great platforms, right? Really, they all do the job really well. And they can bridge, a lot of them can bridge the prem world and the cloud world, and that's really important. But yeah, who's got the best AI story? That's what's going to carry the day. And you think about, well, nobody's going to do AI better than Google, really. Maybe Microsoft or Amazon, yeah, maybe. But and that's the same reason why, anyways. So that's where I say, okay, if that's how the buying criteria is changing, then boy, like you say, it's hard to see how a contact center native player is really going to win unless they just do it in a really smart way.
Yeah, I think that a lot of them are trying to or have acquired the way into it. But if I look at, I can't really speak to too much depth about Five9 and Genesys particularly because I don't know a great deal about their solutions. I know plenty of customers that are using the Genesys AI capabilities, and I know the limitations of it. I don't know about Five9, but it seems to me as though they buy these companies, with Five9, I think it was Inference. With Genesys, it was Bold 360 or 365, whatever it was called. Capable platforms. But then they kind of don't really do anything with it. So by the time you see it, and I won't mention names because there's another company who did this, that bought a platform And at the time, it was a fairly decent platform. I was familiar-ish with the platform when they bought it. I saw what they'd done with it 18 months later, and basically nothing had changed but the logo. So it's like in a world where you've got OpenAI releasing a new model every week, and you've got companies like Cognigy and Boost. I know we keep talking about those two. There's plenty of others as well, OpenStream, OneReach, and a bunch of others. When you've got companies like that that are constantly iterating and improving their product set, and every single month there's just brand new capabilities that are like the bleeding edge of what's possible in the AI automation space, and you compare that to a company who believes that it's a bolt-on, an add-on to their CCaaS business. They don't have the same investment, so they're going to be by the time they realize it, they're going to be so far behind. It's going to be impossible.
Yeah, there's definitely like a culture thing. Certain organizations, maybe there's just a management mentality that it might be too late to change for some of these companies. That's true. But also, to be fair, though, we're talking about a world that we're very kind of embedded in, Kane. Like, we kind of know what's happening, but it's not fair to kind of look at this as kind of I don't know, like a monolith situation. In other words, there are many segments of the contact center, CX market, whatever you want to call it. These are really becoming outdated terms now, but not all of these these businesses move at the same speed, right? As fast as you say, these new iterations keep coming out. The ability for most companies to absorb new technologies is way behind what the vendors are pushing out there. So there are going to be leading edge contact centers. They're typically very digital first businesses who may only have been around. Like when you look at, any retail segment, you can just look at the digital retailers, the digital whatever, like Carvanas of the world. They're bringing new ways of buying and selling every product under the sun. Those companies are digital first, and they're perfect candidates for like reinventing things like, house insurance, car insurance, right? Food shopping, retail experiences. The really savvy ones can use these tools and have fantastic results. Remember the German retailer we saw at Cognigy? I can't remember the name of them. They were fantastic.
Kaufland, was it? Was it Kaufland?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Right. They showed about how they've kind of reinvented the whole retail experience with AI tools. That was great, right? But the Tesco's of the world, how fast are they going to move, right? It's going to take a long time. So different segments of the market are going to be impacted in different ways. So we have to be careful to say, these contact center native players, if they don't adapt, they're going to die. No, there's still plenty of business out there. Smaller players like TalkDesk. You wonder, well, how are they surviving? Well, you know what? If you look at what they're doing, they're having their share of successes too. And, Five9 being a public company, Genesis being public company, Five9 being public for sure. They're posting good numbers. You can see, okay, they're growing. They may not be profitable. That's true, but they're growing. And so there's a lot of room here in this space. It hasn't been totally saturated yet, but that time is going to come for sure.
I think the advantage that they've got is very those type of companies, very big customer base, and often pretty long contracts. So if you're, for example, a good example is it the NHS or is it? Okay, it might be the NHS. Essentially, I think it's the NHS. They are out to tender now for a next-gen contact centre, basically, and it comes around once every 10 years, and it's like literally like, I can't remember how much it is, £160 million contract or something like that. And it's like stuff like that comes around. You win that, and you're laughing for a while, like that. That contract's not going to come up for renewal for a while. So I do think that although the headlines would have you believe that complete disruption is imminent, businesses have got contracts, and those contracts renew. And there's also another company that I'm familiar with who's going through a similar kind of process, not as big a tender as that, but still the same sort of tender, looking for a renewal of their CCaaS. And the debate that they're having internally is, we know that we could go with, for example, a Genesis, and we'll be in safe hands for the next 5 years. But internally, it's like, well, do we need something that's a bit more messaging centric, a bit more AI centric? And so it's kind of like organizationally split in the middle. half the organization thinks, well, let's just get something that we can trust. The other half of the organization is like, well, actually, let's get something that allows us a bit more flexibility and innovation. And so there'll probably be a time when the group of people that want more flexibility and innovation becomes the majority, but that might not be for this contract. So you're still talking a few waves left before this full thing shakes out, aren't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a lot of this is generational too, right? As the digital natives, come to dominate, and they are dominating already. But when the digital immigrants like me, when we run our course, and everybody's a digital native, we won't be having these conversations anymore. We won't. But right now, there's still those in generational kind of divides in terms of how people think about technology and relate to it and use it. Because we're all users of technology as consumers, so we kind of know what the tools are. But a lot of organizations move slowly, and new technologies, as fast as the innovation comes, the dissipation of new technologies does take longer than we think. You remember when VoIP came out? That's kind of where I started in this space, Kane. When VoIP came out, it was 1995, but it didn't become commercially viable for several years later. But when it started to become real, it looked like this was going to basically demolish the entire PSTN infrastructure, and the AT&Ts of the world would be obsolete and put out of business. Well, here we are like 20, 30 years later, and VoIP is dominant, but it hasn't like displaced everything. It
Mm.
takes a long time. That legacy infrastructure, contact center in particular, like large, complex installations, have taken decades to perfect. Very complicated, customized, integrations and partnerships with all kinds of vendors. They're in no hurry to dismantle that because it's going to take a long time. So those things are going to have to run their course. At least with the PSTN, it is going to be sunset out, and it will eventually go away. And they'll sell all the copper infrastructure for a lot of money because people want to buy copper now. But that will go away, and and it will be totally void. The contact center world is still very much a premise-based reality for a lot of companies. So it's going to take a long time for the big customers, especially. And of course, the ones that are in regulated industries, of course, right? Healthcare, finance, government, that kind of stuff. You got to be very careful. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
That's why Avaya is still around.
Yeah. 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 Although I heard that Mitel is going through some pretty bad
Oh, and the
situations.
same thing, my time.
Yeah. But I suppose that kind of like is helpful to give people perspective on why perhaps some companies are moving a bit slower when it comes to AI than perhaps you would expect. You would expect that, like, even for the last decade, NLU systems have been good enough to have a good impact in the call center. Now with generative AI, the capabilities are there now with the existing models. If you use them in the right way and you combine them with more traditional machine learning type of technologies, if you've got a holistic solution, you can accomplish a hell of a lot with what's already there. But every single business on the planet isn't doing it. And I think you've alluded to a lot of the reasons around why is because they've got other problems that they need to solve in terms of their whole infrastructure side of things. And then when you hear stories about, oh well, the hallucination rate of these LLMs is still at 5% or whatever like that, you're like, well, that's just the icing on the cake. I'm definitely not going to touch it now.
Yeah, there's two issues. Obviously, trust. If the guardrails aren't there, and of course the cost, right? I mean, it's a very sexy thing to AIize everything you can, but as long as you keep spending money, but it's okay if you get results. But if you're not seeing the results, whether it's cost savings or improved satisfaction with customers, which translates into more revenues, if you're not linking it to tangible results, that AI, investment is not going to continue indefinitely. They're going to say, wait a minute, we're throwing good money after bad here and nothing's happening. And if we have trust issues and we have, as you say, these bad experiences, it just takes, I hate to be glib, but it just takes one bad piece of advice from whatever, say it's a pharmaceutical company or a drug company, that a customer, takes the wrong medication or the wrong dosage because ChatGPT gave it some advice. The lawsuits are just waiting to happen for those few bad examples. that nobody wants to go near that, right? So there's good reasons why this hesitation. It certainly is, as we know, it's not a fully baked technology by any stretch yet, and you got to start it in small doses and build up the trust and fine tune it. The saving grace for AI, as we know, Kane, is that it gets better the more you use it.
Mm.
It's an iterative technology. It's very different. You talk about mentality. Not that long ago, when you bought a phone system, a PBX, it was a forever investment, right? You buy it, you deploy it, you don't have to touch it for 20 years. It just does its thing. It doesn't innovate. It just does what it does, and you can sleep at night. AI ain't like that, right? It's going to make a lot of mistakes, but then eventually it kind of improves and the cost curves go down, and then you can trust it, and then it's worth it. But you've got to have the patience to let it kind of grow, nurture it, kind of like a little baby. It starts to get its feet, it can walk, it can run. Then it can be very good, but it doesn't work that way out of the box.
No, and it doesn't ever necessarily just do its own work on its own. You always need, it'll always need looking after and constant improvement and stuff like that. Where do you think the market sits now in terms of its AI capability? So if you look at some of the new school vendors that are AI native, like the Bland AIs and Sierras and the Crew AIs and these agentic platforms and stuff like that, and it's like there's a load of new entrants into the AI automation space that are probably not even, for those companies, they're not even thinking about contact centers and UCaaS and CCaaS. They're just trying to build AI capabilities, for example. But then you have the kind of like, I suppose, legacy players that are incorporating some degree of AI capabilities into their solutions. And I remember there was an event in London a couple of years back. It was probably in 2023, and it was the Call and Contact Center Expo or something like that. And I'm having a walk around, and every single CCaaS stand had AI on it. And I kind of made a point of going around to see, like, what is your AI capabilities? And I was very disappointed when I left, because everything was either summarization and disposition code generation, or it was borrowed AI services from elsewhere that were not really part of the platform. And since then, I did an event with Speechmatics and Content Guru this week.
Yep.
And I have to say, I was quite impressed with Content Guru, a company that before that session, my assumption was it's kind of like the rest of them. It talks about AI, probably not doing a great deal. But actually, speaking to the deputy CEO, and he's given us some use cases and client examples and things that they've rolled out, and it's like they're actually doing pretty well. So there's definitely hints of some companies that are starting to get it right. But at a sort of like market level, incorporating valuable AI capabilities into that three-legged stool, as you were talking about earlier on, is it mature? Does it have a way to go? Where do you see it?
Yeah, a way to go for sure. I'm glad you mentioned Content Guru. Now, they're UK based, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm primarily North American based, and most, you can't ignore the noise and the, all the activity in the U.S. That's still the most attractive market for these technologies, and the U.S. mentality tends to be very U.S. centric. The EU companies tend to fly under the radar a little bit, and they have more guardrails in place. They're a little more they tend to be more progressive and thoughtful about using AI in a good way, in a smart way, rather than just throwing stuff out there. I mentioned Infobip, I think, earlier. I was at their event last month, their analyst event, and really, really liked what I was seeing. But they've taken a very thoughtful approach to AI, and because they've got the GDPR and kind of right to be forgotten. You have those pieces in the EU that force you to kind of be a little more disciplined in what you bring to market. And so I think that because they're a little under the radar in North America, they don't get the attention. Like you say, Content Guru, who's heard of them? Well, if you're an analyst, you know, but most people don't. But they're doing good work. And so, okay, there's certainly players who are, closer to being on a lot more mature end of the spectrum, right? Than the other ones who are just running with everything they can get their hands on. And yeah, you're right. The use cases are fairly, kind of, plain vanilla stuff, the call summaries and, the agentic stuff for writing emails. that stuff's okay. It's not, the thing is, what I emphasized with AI is, it's transformative technology. You don't deploy AI just to get some incremental gains. You want to have
Mm,
cut down call handle time by 10 seconds. That's not what you use AI for. You want transformative change that really takes you to new levels, new services, and that's where the exciting part is. And that's where I think it's going to go. And eventually, like you say, they all have an AI story. But to me, it's like the less they say AI, the better, because
mm.
it kind of glosses people's eyes over it. They've heard it enough from everybody. It's more, what are the business problems you're trying to solve? What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? And yes, we use AI to do it, but that's not the story we're selling. We're trying to help you solve your business problems. That's an easier, more relatable conversation to have than trying to wow someone with your AI capabilities. How many languages you support and what LLMs you use, and maybe even SLMs, whatever, and just how deep you go. Unless you're a data scientist, you're going to get lost hearing that kind of conversation, right? And we're not
Yeah,
data scientists.
yeah, and ultimately, all that really matters is the impact that they're having in terms of company X did Y and accomplished Z. That's like
Yeah,
ultimately the whole point. So, and that's sort of like that's what makes me think a little bit about how, maybe as much attention as AI has, the adoption, you were saying earlier that adoption of new technologies is generally a bit slower. And I think that's the case because as much attention as AI has, as much interest as it is, you know, you don't necessarily, for every headline that you see and hear about AI surpasses some new benchmark, or X model has been released, or there's another open source model that's like half the size of the last one and twice as good. For all of those things that you see, you don't see as many company X achieves Y, you know?
yeah, the proof points,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I've got an article coming out in No Jitter this week, focusing on the Nice Interactions event, and they provided some very solid case studies, customer successes, where the metrics were there to
Mm.
show the kind of results they were getting. And so the companies that are doing it well are getting, very tangible results. And it's great to see. But, so there's no question, Kane, we're in a very high level of hype cycle with AI now, and it's
Yeah.
just going to continue. And all I can hope for is that we don't have any huge meltdowns, data breaches, wipeouts of customer databases, and obviously those, yeah, the hallucinations and negative messages. And then of course there's always the risk that your agentic AI deployments might turn on you, right? And deny you access because your voice print didn't match theirs and they think you're an imposter. All those all those dark scenarios are possible, and hopefully we don't get too much of that. But those are things, the kind of the fear factors. People still have to live with this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's getting better. I mean, that kind of shows, I think, why it's right to be a bit cautious. I think if you go into an AI project with a degree of kind of caution and excitement's the wrong word, but kind of like, what am I trying to say? Cautious optimism.
Optimism.
Yeah, cautious optimism.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's good.
That's the
Hmm.
best way to be, really. And I think a lot of it is also about starting from the perspective of feasibility. I mean, what a lot of organizations do is they'll just try and deploy something, very much similar to how you were describing some of the vendors where they just throw AI in there because it's cool. There's been a lot of companies who've kind of had a similar sort of approach, just build something with AI because it's cool. Whereas I think if you have a more kind of like value-led approach, what are we trying to achieve? Where's the biggest problem that we can tackle? And then conduct more of a feasibility-based approach, not promising to solve the world, but just seeing whether we can get some value and be a bit cautious but optimistic. And I think that's where all of the the companies we've had on the podcast, the companies that we've worked with in the past and currently, that tends to be the approach that they take, and that seems to be what works well.
Yeah, and again, there's a bit of a struggle between the transformational potential of AI to kind of reinvent everything, which it can do in the right hands, but then the realities of, well, what you're actually able to do today, and knowing what to do with it. a lot of companies don't know where to start with AI. They just know they need to do it, and management, especially, is mandating they have to do it. So they got to find something. Um, but it's really understanding, the use cases and applications. But I'll also say that, in the big scheme of things, like AI is really good at doing certain things, like recognizing patterns and processing data in real time, all that kind of stuff. That's what it's built for. And frankly, the problems that we're talking about in contact centers and especially in the workplace are frankly, they're not that interesting use cases when it comes to what AI is really, really well suited for. And so if you really want to start to stir your imagination about, well, what could we be doing? Looking outside of our spaces to see where AI is being used for, much more not noble purposes, but more, I don't know, more important things like, medical research, studying climate patterns, trying to resolve, improve food logistics, distribution of food across the world, big problems that need big capabilities. And I don't want to get too far ahead, but if you really want to start thinking about where this stuff can be going and is starting to go, you got to look at companies like NVIDIA, where they build the tools that power a lot of this, high end processing, whether it's on your PC or certainly on your data center, in your data centers, but even on your phones. When those endpoints start to have these higher level capabilities, AI starts to become very much more relevant because of the things it can do. And you start looking at like where NVIDIA is going. They talk about AI factories, the way they're automating things at high levels in industries that are well outside of what we're doing. And you start, again, the US perspective, Kane, is very insular, I find. I've been to China a couple of times, and I've seen there's a port called Tianjin, and it's 100% automated. It's one of the biggest ports in China, and there isn't a human being in sight. And the whole thing runs, it's like watching a ballet. It's silent, no people, and everything works in perfect harmony. It's an incredible thing to see. And it just shows you when you take automation, it's IoT too and 5G, but when you take those tools to a certain kind of logical extension, the things you can do, this is why people think that autonomous vehicles will happen. And in some ways, it is happening already. In these ports, those vehicles are autonomous, but they work, they move very slowly, but they still work. And it's like, look at what's possible. And you start boiling that down to say, well, what could I do in my business that kind of, you start thinking differently now about what we're talking about. It's not, as you say, if you're bolting AI onto a problem set that you're already living with, that's not going to get you very far. Talk about new problem sets, new possibilities, new capabilities. That's where it gets exciting. And you start having to think outside your comfort zone, outside the box. That's where the real innovation and exciting leadership is going to come from. We'll get there, right? I think we will.
I think we will. It's an imagination problem. I've wrote about this recently, which is that I think that many businesses don't have the imagination to do the things that you were just describing there because they're too busy with the problems that they have in front of them. But at the same time, the AI capabilities that we have today is more than capable of solving many of those problems sitting right in front of you in a very safe and effective way. So it's almost like, my message is just get on with it, solve the problem in front of you, just start using these tools, get it done, and then you can make the space for the bigger, more transformative stuff. Yeah.
Gee, I think we should take this on the road. I think we can solve these problems for these guys.
I think we can. It's easier to sit here and talk about it, though, isn't it? But yeah,
yeah.
Definitely. Nice one. Well, John, this has been an absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much. I know it's been a long time coming. Let's not leave it so long next time. We'll have to do this again.
Yes.
And see where we are in a few months' time.
All right. Can't wait to see the finished product. This is going to be fun.
Nice one. Cheers, John. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for watching. Okay.
Likewise.
Until next time.
And thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks then. Bye now.